Think about the first 3 months you were together. You went places, you tried things, you showed up at a restaurant neither of you had heard of and stayed until they kicked you out. You planned a weekend trip on a Wednesday night because the idea hit and neither of you wanted to wait. Now think about last month and try to tell me one evening that looked different from the rest. Something changed between then and now, and it happened so gradually that it never felt like a change. It felt like settling in, like you'd finally found someone who gets you, someone who doesn't need a restaurant or a plan or a reason to leave the house to enjoy a night together. Just the two of you. Home, quiet, perfect. But lately, something has been shifting underneath that comfort, and you can't quite name it. The conversations are thinner, the evenings blend into each other. You're spending every night side by side, somehow feeling further apart than when you used to meet for dates you actually had to get dressed for. This video is about what happens to a relationship when the couch always wins, why it feels so safe, what it's quietly taking from both of you, and the surprising science behind why couples who do things together outside the house stay closer than couples who do everything inside it. Let's start with why staying in is so seductive. Because it's not laziness. It's something your brain is engineered to prefer. Your nervous system has one primary job: minimize threat. And home is the lowest threat environment you have. No logistics, no performance, no unpredictable situations to navigate. When you're on the couch with your partner, your cortisol drops, your muscles relax, and your brain receives a steady signal. Nothing bad is happening here. Stay. Going out requires the opposite: planning, getting dressed, dealing with weather or reservations or traffic. Your brain has to spend energy on uncertainty, and uncertainty, even the mild kind, registers as low-level stress. So when the choice is between a quiet evening in and the friction of getting out the door, the couch wins. Not because it's better, because your brain is wired to follow the path of least resistance. Dr. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, described this as the default bias, the human tendency to choose whatever requires the least amount of change from the current state. It's the same reason people don't switch bank accounts, don't cancel subscriptions they never use, and don't rearrange their furniture. The default feels safe, and safe feels good, until safe becomes a cage, and by then, you've forgotten you had a key. The couch isn't winning because you prefer it. It's winning because your brain is wired to avoid the small discomfort of doing something different. And every time it wins, the next outing becomes a little harder to initiate, until eventually staying in doesn't feel like a choice anymore. It feels like the only option. Now, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to explain something that connects directly to what's happening on your couch. There is a specific chemical in your brain that controls how attracted you feel to your partner. And research shows that this chemical responds to one thing above all else. It's not romance. It's not physical appearance. It's something you can only get by walking out your front door together. But first, the part about what the couch is actually replacing. Think about the last 3 months, not how they felt, but what you actually remember. Can you point to a specific evening, a specific moment, something that makes November different from December, different from January? Or has it all blurred into one long, comfortable, indistinguishable stream? This is the first real cost of always staying in, and it's one most couples never notice because it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like routine. But here's what memory research tells us. Your brain doesn't store time evenly. It stores events, novel experiences, a weekend trip, a new restaurant, a ridiculous pottery class where you both made something terrible. Create what psychologists call memory landmarks. These are the moments your brain flags as meaningful, worth keeping, worth returning to. And when you look back on a relationship, these landmarks are what make it feel rich, full, and alive. A relationship lived entirely on the couch doesn't create landmarks. It creates one long, indistinguishable Tuesday. And when your brain tries to assess how is this relationship going, it doesn't find highlights. It finds a flat line. Not bad, not good, just the same. Dr. Claudia Hammond, in her book Time Warped, explains that this is why time seems to accelerate as we age. Fewer novel experiences means fewer landmarks, which makes months and years collapse into each other. The same thing happens inside a relationship. The less you do together outside your routine, the shorter and emptier the relationship feels in retrospect. Even if you were technically happy in every individual moment, you're not building memories. You're streaming through time together without pressing record. Now here's the chemical piece I mentioned earlier, and this is the finding that changes everything. Your brain runs desire on dopamine. Not comfort, desire. Wanting, craving, leaning toward another person. And dopamine has a very specific trigger: novelty. New environments, unexpected moments. Situations where the outcome isn't fully predictable. This is why early relationships feel so magnetic. Every date was a first, every conversation a discovery. Your brain was flooded with dopamine because everything was new. But once a couple settles into a pattern, especially one as predictable as the same couch, same show, same evening, every night, dopamine production around the partner starts to decline. Not because you love them less, but because your brain has fully mapped them. There's nothing left to discover on that couch. And the dopamine system, having nothing new to respond to, goes quiet. Dr. Arthur Aaron at Stony Brook University tested this directly. He took long-term couples and split them into two groups. One group did pleasant, familiar activities together. The other did novel, mildly challenging activities, things they'd never tried before. The couples who shared new experiences showed measurable increases in relationship satisfaction and reported feeling more attracted to each other. The familiar activity group, no change. The takeaway isn't go skydiving or your relationship dies. The takeaway is that your brain needs you to leave the house together and do something that breaks the pattern. A hike you've never taken. A cooking class where you're both out of your depth. A weekend trip to a town neither of you has been to. Paddle on a Saturday morning. Anything that puts both of you in a situation where the evening can't be predicted from the couch. That's not a luxury. That's maintenance. And a relationship without it is running on fumes. It doesn't know we're running out. Now, here's a symptom of this pattern that creeps in so gradually you don't recognize it as a problem. You just feel it as a vague heaviness. You run out of things to talk about. Not because you've become boring, not because the relationship is failing, but because conversation feeds on input, and when both of you consume the same environment, the same shows, the same four walls every single day, there's nothing new to bring to the table. You already know what they watched. You already know what they ate. You were sitting right there when it happened. Research on conversational satisfaction in couples shows that partners who maintain separate experiences, individual hobbies, solo outings, time spent in different environments, report richer, more engaging conversations with each other. Not because they're more interesting people, but because they have something to exchange. A story the other person hasn't heard. A perspective they couldn't have gotten from the couch. Dr. Esther Perel describes this as the paradox of intimacy and desire. We want closeness, but desire needs distance. Not emotional distance, but experiential distance. A gap between your world and theirs that creates curiosity. How was your day? Only works as a question when the answer isn't same as yours. And this is where the couple who stays in every night hits a wall they didn't see coming. The relationship feels flat, but they can't point to a problem. There's no fight, no betrayal, no dramatic failure. Just two people sitting next to each other with less and less to say. And they assume it means the spark is gone. It's not gone. It's starving. And the food it needs is out the door, not on the screen. Now I want to flip this around because this video isn't just about what's going wrong. It's about what the research says actually works. There is a specific type of activity that relationship psychologists have identified as the most effective at reigniting connection in long-term couples. It's not date nights. It's not vacations. It's shared physical or creative activities, things you do together, outside with your hands or your body, that require active participation from both of you. Think about what that includes. A pottery class where you're both terrible, a paddle game where you're on the same team, a weekend bike ride through a route you found online, cooking a complicated meal together in someone else's kitchen, building something at a workshop, even something as simple as exploring a farmer's market in a town you've never visited. What all of these have in common is what psychologists call synchronized engagement, both partners actively doing something at the same time in the same physical space with a shared goal or experience. And the research on this is clear. Couples who engage in these activities regularly report higher satisfaction, stronger emotional bonding, and crucially, higher physical attraction to each other. This isn't about being active for health reasons. It's about what shared doing creates between two people that shared watching never can. When you try something new together, when you're both a little uncomfortable, a little out of your element, a little ridiculous, you see each other differently, not as the person on the other end of the couch, as a person. A full, surprising, interesting person you chose to be with. And that reminder, oh right, I like this human, doesn't come from rewatching their favorite show for the third time. It comes from watching them fail at pottery and laugh about it. So what do you actually do with all of this? Here's what the research consistently points to, and it's smaller than you think. One night a week. That's the threshold. One evening where the TV stays off, the takeout stays unordered, and both of you leave the house together to do something that didn't happen last week. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be far. It doesn't even have to be fun in the traditional sense, because the point isn't entertainment. The point is novelty. New input for your brain, new memories for your timeline, new things to talk about when you're back on the couch tomorrow. And here's a practical trick that actually works. Pick the thing on Sunday. Don't wait until Friday evening when the inertia is at its peak and the couch is already warm. Decide early in the week, commit to it. Treat it like something that's already happening, not something you'll consider. Because your brain will always vote for the default. The only way to beat the default is to pre-decide before the default has a chance to speak. The couch isn't the enemy. The couch is great. But a relationship that only exists on one piece of furniture is a relationship that's slowly forgetting why it started. You didn't fall in love on that couch. You fell in love out in the world, being people who did things, who went places, who surprised each other by being more than the sum of a blanket and a remote. Go be those people again, even if it's just on Thursdays. If you watch this entire video on the couch with your partner, good. Now close the laptop, look at each other, and pick a place. Anywhere. This week. Subscribe. We break down the psychology behind relationships every week. And send this to a couple you haven't seen in a while. They might need it more than they'd admit.